What's up everybody, and welcome to our Java tutorial number 5, and your host is Tom Rex, the coder. So let's discuss what we'll be talking about in this video. We're gonna try to dive a little bit deep into some concepts which will soon lead us into the discussion of the OOP concepts. Cool. So in this video we are gonna be covering methods, then we will cover the introduction to arrays. Now with arrays, Java has different kinds of arrays. In this tutorial or in this video, we'll just introduce what we call the array list class. We'll cover some other arrays in future tutorials, right? Cool. So let's break down these methods of ours and define them as to what are they, and also discuss a little bit about their syntax, right? So in this video, what we're going to do is we're going to first just discuss these small concepts, then we're going to be putting it all in code. So what we have is a method is just a block of code that runs upon being called. So this block of code only runs when you call it, right? Cool. Let's check out the syntax, right? So you start by specifying the access modifier. So this is just how accessible you want your method to be, and then you specify the type of data and then the name of the function. I know this might not be making sense when it's being on the slides, but when you go to code it will make sense. Then you open curly braces for the block of this method, and then you're gonna have statements. So it can be just one statement or statements of code, and then you have a return statement, but that is if you specify the data type. If you want to define a function that just prints something, you don't really have to have the return statement, and then you have a closing braces, right? Cool. So we have different types of methods, though this might just be different forms of a method in a way, not really just different types, because different types might be a bit misleading, but this is just different forms that your method can appear in, right? So so you have a method with parameters, right? So you can have a method that has one parameter of a specific data type or parameters of specific data types. They can be the same types or different types. We'll discuss this when we get to the coding side. It will make sense. And then we have a method without any parameters. So with this one, we don't have to worry about any of the parameters, right? And then we also discuss arguments, because there gets to be a confusion whenever we discuss methods, right? Parameters and functions. How do we differentiate the two? What are parameters? What are arguments? So when you define a function, when you define a method, you define a method with certain number of parameters. If it has parameters, right? That's when you're defining your method. You're defining your method with parameters. When you call a method, you call a method and pass an argument. That argument initializes the parameter of a function or a method. Do you get to see the connection? The arguments is when you talk about arguments, this is you at the point of calling a method. When you talk about a parameter, this is you at the point of creating a method. Does that make sense? Hopefully that's gonna make sense when we do the discussion on the coding side, because sometimes some concepts are better understood or easily understood when you are seeing the code, right? So when we discussed the syntax of a method, I spoke about access modifiers, right? So this is gonna be the topic for the future in terms of like deeply diving into the access modifiers, because I don't want to just dive into too much concepts at this stage, because we want to keep it easy for us and simple and easy enough for us to fully understand the concepts. So we don't want to just rush into discussing too much, because too much info can be overwhelming and you really don't want to be at the point of being overwhelmed, right? But then one thing I just want to mention is that in this tutorial we're just gonna stick with the static methods. Why? Because already the method that is always in your Java application is the main method, which is always static, so we're just gonna stick with that. Okay, cool. So let's head over to the coding side. There we go. Let's just improve our let's go. There we go. Cool. So we're just gonna make directory and let's just call it methods, since this is the main topic of the day, right? And I did mention about arrays. We're gonna discuss about arrays in the code, right? Cool. So let's define a class called method.java. From the previous tutorial, you might have noticed that we did discuss that this is going to be the same as your class name. Your Java file is always the same as your class name. Cool. We start, right? And then we define our class. Our class is method. And then we'll have our main method, static void main, right? Cool. This is what we have, right? This is our main method. But now we want to define a method, right? So we just want to define a method that displays information. So we're gonna have method with no parameters, right? But then this method doesn't return any value, right? And then we're gonna have a method with parameters, but then it returns and has a have a return value, right? That one doesn't have a return value with no return value, because I'm just displaying information, right? And then what else? We're gonna be discussing about arrays, right? Specifically, we're gonna talk about array list, right? Cool. this should be more than enough in terms of discussing all these concepts which is discussed now, right? Cool. So let's start with the method, right? This is the method with no return value. Now you see how this function is defined. So the first part, these are access modifiers, right? And then we have the type of data that this function returns. So it doesn't return any value, right? So it's a void function. If you're having a function that doesn't return anything, that function is of void, right? And you might have noticed about the parameters I mentioned, right? This is you defining a method, right? So these are called parameters. But then you will see as we go deep as to how or when do we get to use this, right? Because so far we haven't used this, but this is gonna come in handy when we discuss about command line arguments. Cool. So let's discuss, say for instance, right, I just want to start defining my method. As I mentioned, I said static method, right? And I decide to not have public. What's gonna happen? Let's try it out, right? This is us learning, so you learn by trial and error. So I just want to fully demonstrate a little bit of something just before you go deep so that you get to have a full understanding, because it's gonna get a bit more complicated, and you will see why I'm starting with the static methods, because we haven't started talking about objects yet, how to create new objects, let alone how to describe what a class is and all that. I keep saying that we're going to be using classes, right? Just like this is an array list class which we're going to have to import. So when we get to that part, I will show you, and we'll get, I think we're heading there in terms of the object oriented concepts. So just stay tuned, and also do pay attention to all the concepts that we have learned so far, because they will form part of a bigger picture that we were heading towards. So for now, this is just us starting drawing a bigger picture. So we start with the small concepts, then things are going to take a big turn when we start discussing about the OOP concepts. Object oriented programming is not that easy. It wants you to fully understand your concepts, but then you will see the beauty of it as to why object orientation, as to why Java itself is an object oriented programming language, and it does have OOP concepts, like when you dive deep into the whole thing. And then you will also learn how to create your own class, set properties for your class, and use it in accordance to your own application. We're gonna get to discuss that. Cool. So here we're defining a method with no parameters, a method that doesn't even have a return value. So static, that's the access modifier, right? And then what we need next is the type, right? So this doesn't return anything, so it's a void. And then let's just call this function display, which is a function name, right? Open parenthesis, close parenthesis. There's no parameters, so you don't put anything inside the parenthesis. All you do is just open and close the block, and then say system.out.println, right? I am a parameterless method. That makes sense, right? Cool. Let's head over to our main function. So if I was to run this program, right, without calling this function, we just have to put a little bit of something there so that I don't define an empty main method, and then I run the program. This was not going to be executed because this was not called. So a function, it is a block of code that only runs when you call the function. So you might be wondering, why am I using a function, a method? This is one and the same thing. It's a function, right? It's a method, it's a function. What is this function doing? It is doing this action. What is this method doing? This action. It's a function. So function, method, one and the same. Though in some cases some arguments get to arise as to that, no, it's not precisely the same, but it is one and the same thing. It's a function. Function, it's a method, right? Just that in Java we tend to use more of a method, but if you go to other languages, for instance, I think mostly in Python, that's where we use functions more entirely, right? Cool. But enough with that. So let's call this method, right? So when you call this method, you just call the method and then the parenthesis, right? So I'm just gonna copy this and I'm just gonna paste it there, and that's my function call. So let's try executing this method and see what happens, right? So we wrote a file which is taking that much space. Let's close this. Cool. There we go. So we have that, right? And then we have a new tab, right? So what we have is our file. So we're gonna compile this file, right? So javec, if you do remember from a previous tutorial, we use the Java compiler. So this is our Java compiler. It compiles and then it creates an executable file, right? That is translated, right? So if I say Java method and then I just call the method, this is me compiling or running this file. No, not compiling, I'm running. That's where I'm compiling using a Java compiler. Now I'm just running a Java program and I am using the file that was created upon after the compile was of success. There we go. And then it says I'm a parameterless method. So this is you calling that function. So you're calling that function, right? So why functions, right? You might be wondering. So what happens if I call the same method? Yes, it is safe to paste. Cool. I write, and then if you remember from a previous tutorial, I have to recompile again. Let me just run as well. Ooh, method. Method, and there we go. You see, it does the same thing. So the advantage of having a method is that you have an action, but you don't want to always repeat the same code over and over again. You can just define it once and execute the method, right? But then now the question is, what if I want to execute that method based on the user input, right? So if that's the case, that's where we get to the part of having parameters, right? Depending on the data type that you want to use as the input, right? You're going to use that in your function, right? For instance, let's write a program that gets a user input, right? So we're just going to have the one that prints a parameterless method, and then we start with a new one, static. So say we want to provide our name, right? So this is of type string, and then it's get name. So this is a function that gets the name, right, or prints the name, display name. Oh no, return name, because I'm not going to display, I'm going to display on that other one. So I'm going to have a return value in this one. Return name. One other thing about functions or method is that you can't name them the same as keywords, right? Cool. And then you're gonna have a parameter, right? That parameter of a certain data type, which is a string. And then that's name, right? Open, close, and there we go. And then what you want to do there is return your name is, and then you concatenate name, right? Cool. So now let's call this function. Let me just copy the name, or let me just copy the whole thing. So you have one parameter there, right, which is name of a certain data type. So you've seen the data types, you know how to declare data types, so that shouldn't be a problem for you to understand. Now upon calling the method, that's where we pass in the what we'll pass in again, arguments. Let's say we want to do this from the input, right? So you will remember from our previous tutorial, import java.util.scanner. That's our scanner class, right? Then we create an object which we're gonna discuss. Scanner, then input, and then it's new scanner, then it's system.in, right? Cool. So we're calling our function return, right? And then we have input dot what, next line, right? Remember those methods, right? That if you want a string, we just have to do that, right? It's next line, and then we're done. But now let's just have a little bit of this. System.out.print, there we go. Then we have this, what is your name? Cool. And then we have that, right? We have that. So let's run this program and see what happens, right? Expected, oh, we forgot a semicolon. Java is quite interesting. With our program, so basically our program was there. That's where the compiler began to complain before we even ran our program. Why am I even deleting that? Let's delete everything. Java method and Java method. Cool. Yeah, seems we are forgetting a lot of those, and that's one other thing that I wanna wait, let me see that error again. What is the name? Oh yeah, I see. So that's one of the things that I always tell people, that don't afraid to make errors. Don't be afraid of errors. Errors is something that helps you, like for instance, in terms of understanding of errors, right? I know we haven't actually discussed more about different type of errors, but the more you explore errors, the more you get to grow as a person, and you get to also understand different kinds of errors, right? So don't be afraid to fail. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Mistakes are there, right? You make mistakes on a daily basis, but then through those mistakes you get to improve, because you don't want to do the same mistake again. And the other thing with coding now is that when you get too exposed to an error, right? For instance, you get that error and then it tells you why the compiler is complaining, you know where to go. And if you're recalling, or if you are seeing what is happening here, this is Vim. you don't have any code line, so you have to be able to spot where the error is. But then if you're dealing with a large big project, you need to have an IDE so that it points you to where the error is, the line number, and then on your IDE it shows you the number, right? So this Vim is just for you to learn and to improve or upgrade your confidence in coding, right? That's what this Vim is all about, or rather that's the role that this Vim gets to play. If it's just a small program, you can just do it with just Vim, right? And the other thing is that in IDEs, for instance, I mostly use IntelliJ, so it does do the import for you. If you try to use a class that is not accessible within the class that you're working with, it automatically imports for you upon you hovering your mouse to where the error is, and then get the options. It says import and it imports for you, right? But then that makes you not to understand where to find that scanner class, right? Because it just imports for you, so you don't get to understand or know the package that you need in order to be able to use a certain class. Cool. So let's make sure that we have saved this. Cool. And then we execute. There we go. It calls the first two parameters, right? And then I'm gonna provide my name, Morendwa Rachidimba, aka Morex the coder, right? And that's it. And then you get to ask yourself a question: why did it not print anything? Call from this, right? Our method only returns the value, right? So in order for us to print that, where we call our function, we can print that, right? We can call that from our print, because our print just prints whatever value we provide, right? Print line, and then we have that. And then we execute our program. Let's just call this guy Morex the coder, right? And then it prints your name is Morex the coder. So you see what happens. So let's go back to our program. I know this might be overwhelming. Take a bit of a breather and walk with me as I explain. So firstly, we define the function, and I mentioned that since we are dealing with a static method, let's just stick with that for now. So with the static method, you don't have to go through object creation or that, which we're going to be discussing in future tutorials, because we can't start discussing about methods that have to first that needs you to first create an object, and you're not creating an object of the method. I know one may be thinking, so I'm going to create an object of this method. This is an object, and then you will see that this is a class name. I will explain all this in the future tutorials so that we don't get to confuse each other. But following through what we have, right, we defined the method, which is of static type. So this method is of the same static type as this method, so you don't have to create an object. But then if this method was so basically static as well, it gets deep into further in to a point where you get to understand aesthetic, like aesthetic method. What is that method in relation to the class itself? So we'll discuss that in future tutorials, right? So don't mind too much about that. For now, just know that we are defining methods of types in which you don't have to first create an object of your class in order for you to access or call the methods in your static method. Cool. So we just define the function that displays something. We call it twice. You can call it as many times as you want. And then secondly, we defined the second type of a method that takes in parameters, right? And then it returns a value of a certain type, which is a string. And then it takes in a parameter of a string type, and then the overall type that it returns is a string. You know that you can concatenate the strings, right? If you were following through my previous tutorials from the print. So there's a string, concatenate that with that. This is always dependent on that. So you can always call this function and get different input. For instance, let's improve our code there so that you get to see the beauty of the functions, right? Cool. So I'm just gonna copy these 2 lines, paste it there, and yes, I know, I am aware of what I'm doing. It's safe. And then enter your second name, right? Cool. And then that's what we get. But now we're gonna have to improve this because now this is saying that, but don't worry much, let's just use it as it is. Cool. Then let's run our program. So we update our executable file and then we execute. So say put in my first name, Morendra. So my name is Morendra, right? Enter my second name, Morex the coder, and then I have my second name. So you see how this function gets to be used. Use the same function. You didn't have to redefine all those code. You just have the same code. The only thing you do is just using the function and passing that parameter, and it does that for you. So going back there, you will see that you're just returning a value and then you're displaying it there. How does your print function works? You get a value, right? So you're getting this value from the input, right? You're getting the value from the input which you pass there, which is a string, and that method takes in that argument and then it returns a specific value at the same time as well. So go practice these methods and also go check what if you have another parameter, right? It's just a comma and then you have another parameter, right? Go practice that, play with that, and get comfortable because we're gonna be advancing these concepts very soon. And just to make it more nice for us, or to make it easier for us, we're gonna have some tutorial videos which are just problem solving tutorials. Those are gonna be the nice tutorials because they allow you to explore your concepts, right? The concepts that you've learned, and applying them to solve the problem. You can solve them in different angles or from different perspectives, but at the end you're gonna end up with the solution if you are solving it successfully, right? Cool. So let's discuss array, right? So before I even start, okay, let me start and then I'll go and import what needs to be imported. So with an array, so this is just a variable, right? Just like the previous one, but this one is of a different type. So you specify the type. The type, it's gonna be the name of the class that has the capability of creating what? A value or a variable that can hold multiple values, right? So we have a class called array list. And then we're gonna specify the type it holds. Say it's just gonna be should I say type string or int? Let's do int. Int, right? And then you have numbers, and then it's new, name of your class array list. So this is the new object of that, and then you have that, and then you have that. So you can either choose to specify int again or just leave it as it is. It doesn't really matter. Cool. Once you have that, now you want to add numbers to this, right? So basically, before we even go any further, we're not supposed to do this outside a function. So let's do this. Cool. There we go. And that defines our class, and then let's just do it there. Just paste. I should go and change the settings to autosave because we don't want to always be told, are you sure you want to paste? I mean, I know what I'm doing, so I should just paste. Cool. So how do you add items to this array, right? So basically this is us adding values of integer types, right? So just say that's the array name dot add. That's the method that you have. And then let's just add 20. Oh, my num is not up. Cool. There we go. We just add 20. Then oh, I forgot this. And then it's numbers. So you see, you can add as many values as you can, and I will leave you with something to discuss as to what will happen if you add a different type, maybe a string or a char. Cool. So what we're going to do is we're going to use something interesting, right? So you remember our for loop, right? We discussed a for loop previously, but we never discussed the for each loop, did we? Unless if we did discuss. But the for each loop is specifically used for arrays. So the syntax is for, in case if we didn't define it, because I don't fully remember if we did, but just as a bit of a revision, we can do that. So the first thing you do is you specify the type of your items, right? This is an int, and then this is a number, right? And then it's gonna be colon, then the name of your list, which is numbers, and then close that, and then you open the function. What do you want to do there? Just print, right? So it's system dot out dot print line, and then you have number, right? Cool. So that's your for each statement, right? Or that's your for each loop in a way. So now we have to import the class, because we're just using the class, but we're not importing that class, so haven't imported the class. So import java.util dot array list, right? And then we have this, right? So we've written the file, and let's execute. So you will see it cannot find the symbols, numbers, and then we have int. It can't find int. Let's see where the problem is. Int. Okay. If that's the case, let's take integer. Do already like that, I think. Integer, and then we have integer. Cool. There we go. And let's clear all that and see what errors we're gonna get next. Now it cannot find the symbol numbers. It's numbers, but we didn't do the add dot add dot add. Cool. So now let's clear this. You see how you get to have many errors, and then you just solve it. Cool. It's not about just being perfect, it's about you knowing how your code is flowing and where the errors are being spotted at, and then basically when you go back to your code, this is where the error is, this is where the error is. In order to get better at it, you have to go through the process of failing and failing and failing and getting as many errors as you can, and it will stick, right? So I provide my name, and then I provide my YouTube name composed of my nickname and just the added name, right? So that was our previous program. Now what this one is just printing all the numbers in our list, right? So this is a sequence that is capable of carrying more than one item, right? Cool. So that is the end of our 5th tutorial, and I hope this wasn't really that much overwhelming. I know it, to be honest, it was overwhelming for most of you, I believe, but that doesn't mean that this is where you end your journey. Whoa, no, don't end your journey, just practice. So in order for you to fully understand these concepts is that you have to put in the work in a way that you understand your concepts very well. So far we've been learning just small concepts, right? Small concepts, and then you see how you get to apply them in a bigger program or in a more complicated scenario. So don't just learn small concept and be like, nah, I'm done. No, learn, then explore, build confidence into what you're doing, right? Because you want to fully understand the concept at the end of the day. So don't just learn and be like, nah, that's more than enough. It is not enough. You have to practice. You have to know where to use your concept, because you're not learning so that you can solve a specific problem that you already know. Nope. You are learning so that if you are presented with a problem that requires certain skills, you can just deliver, right? So cool. That is enough from my side, and I do hope you do enjoy the video. And if it doesn't make sense, don't repeat the video until it makes sense. I mean, don't just go through it once and then you're like, nah, this is not for me, I chose the wrong language, I'm just gonna run away like many people do. Don't do that, because why would you give up while you have came so far? I mean, it's been 5 tutorials so far, and if you were watching each and every of those videos, putting in your effort, putting in your time, giving up now doesn't really make sense at all. So don't allow yourself to give up now. Keep pressing further. One of the attributes of a software of a developer as a whole is perseverance and being persistent, right? Endure through the whole journey, but never allow yourself to think that this is the end of the road for you. You don't do that. But that's it for me, guys, and I shall see you guys next week Friday. And you guys have a lovely weekend. If you're new to my channel, just hit the subscribe button. If you do like the content, obviously you can hit the notification bell on so that you don't miss our tutorials, because Java tutorials every Friday at 12 we are getting a Java tutorial video, right? So that's it from me, guys. We shall talk, or we shall see each other next week.